The winter of 1883 had come down on Yarrington, Nevada like a cruel fist, and Emma Harper knelt in the frozen dirt behind her father's house, shoulders shaking as silent tears carved hot paths down her wind-chapped cheeks. She pressed her bare fingers against the frost-covered soil where her mother's garden had once bloomed with vegetables that fed them through long, harsh seasons. Now, everything was dead. The late freeze had come unexpectedly in mid-March, killing the early plantings she had so carefully tended, and with them, her hope of keeping food on the table through the coming months. Her father lay inside the small wooden house, his lungs rattling with consumption, too weak to work the mining claims that had already played out. At 22 years old, Emma found herself responsible for keeping them both alive, and she was failing. The sound of hoofbeats made her quickly wipe at her face, but not quickly enough. She looked up to see a tall man dismounting from a buckskin mare, his silhouette framed against the weak morning sun. He wore dusty trail clothes and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his features, but there was something gentle in the way he moved as he approached her, leading his horse with a loose rein. "Madam," he said, his voice a low drawl that carried warmth despite the cold air. "I don't mean to intrude, but I saw you from the road. Are you hurt?" Emma scrambled to her feet, embarrassed to be caught in such a state by a stranger. She was tall for a woman, with dark auburn hair that hung in a practical braid down her back and gray-green eyes that now felt swollen from crying. She brushed dirt from her worn calico dress and tried to compose herself. "I'm fine, thank you. Just having a moment of weakness is all." The cowboy removed his hat, revealing sun-streaked brown hair and a face that looked to be in his mid-20s. His features were strong and honest, with kind hazel eyes that seemed genuinely concerned. "Pardon me for saying so, madam, but you don't look fine. I'm Preston James. I just signed on as foreman at the Miller Ranch, about 5 miles west of here. If there's trouble, I'd be glad to help if I can." Something about his directness, combined with the exhaustion and fear she had been carrying for months, made Emma's careful composure crumble. Fresh tears spilled over and she gestured helplessly at the frozen garden plot. "It's ruined. All of it. I planted early because we needed the food, and the almanac said the freeze was past, but it came back 3 nights ago and killed everything. The potatoes, the beans, the squash seedlings I'd been nursing since January. My father is sick, too sick to work, and I thought if I could just get the garden going, we could make it through until he recovered, but now—" She trailed off, feeling foolish for spilling her troubles to a complete stranger. Preston looked at the frozen garden, then back at her, his expression thoughtful. "What's your name, miss?" "Emma Harper." "Well, Miss Harper, I understand your distress, but this isn't the end. Winter's last gasp often feels the cruelest, but spring always comes back stronger. The soil here is still good, and we're not so late in the season that you cannot try again. I promise you, if you'll let me help, I'll make sure you have a spring you'll never forget. We'll get this garden growing better than it ever has before." Emma stared at him, uncertain whether to feel hopeful or more suspicious. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." "Maybe that's reason enough. I'm new to this territory, and I figure the best way to make it home is to be neighborly. Besides, I grew up on a farm in Missouri before I took to cowboying. I know my way around a garden, and I hate to see good people struggle when a little help could make all the difference." There was no guile in his face, no hint of the ulterior motives Emma had learned to watch for in the rough mining town. Just honest kindness, which somehow made her want to cry all over again. Instead, she squared her shoulders and nodded. "I would be grateful for any help you could offer, Mr. James, though I have to warn you I have no money to pay you for your trouble. Didn't ask for any. Now, do you have any more seeds, or did you use them all in this first planting? I have some left. I saved the best from last year's harvest, but not enough to replant everything. Preston nodded, settling his hat back on his head. That's all right. I'll see what I can do about getting more. First thing, though, we need to clear this plot and prepare it for a second planting. The soil needs to be turned and amended. Do you have any manure or compost? There's some in the lean-to out back. We had a milk cow, but I had to sell her last month to pay the doctor. We'll work with what we have. Can you show me your tool shed? As Emma led Preston around the side of the small house, she felt an odd flutter of something that was not quite hope but close to it. Inside, she could hear her father's rasping cough, and guilt immediately assailed her. She should be inside tending to him, not entertaining strangers in the yard. I should check on my father, she said. He needs his medicine soon. You go on ahead. Just point me to the tools and I'll start working on that garden. We're burning daylight. Emma hesitated, then showed him the shed where the shovels, rakes, and hoes hung on the wall. Are you sure about this? As sure as I've ever been about anything, Miss Harper. She left him there and hurried inside, where the contrast between the cold outdoors and the stuffy, overheated interior made her head swim. Her father, Robert Harper, lay on the narrow bed in the corner, his once robust frame now gaunt and wasted beneath the pile of quilts. At 56, he looked 20 years older. His eyes opened as she approached, and he managed a weak smile. Who was that outside? He asked, his voice a thread of sound. A cowboy named Preston James. He says he's the new foreman at the Miller place. He offered to help with the garden. Robert's brow furrowed. Offered? What does he want in return? Nothing, apparently. He says he just wants to be neighborly. Emma poured water from the pitcher and measured out the laudanum the doctor had left, which was almost gone. They could not afford more. I know it seems strange, but Papa, we need help. I can't do it all alone. Her father reached for her hand, his grip paper thin. I'm sorry, Emma girl. I'm sorry I've left you to carry this burden. If I could just get my strength back. Hush now. You'll get better. You just need rest and time. The lie tasted bitter in her mouth. They both knew the consumption was winning, but neither wanted to say it aloud. She helped him sip the medicine and water, then settled him back against the pillows. I'm going to go help Mr. James with the garden. Call if you need me. Outside, she found Preston had already stripped off his jacket and rolled up his sleeves despite the cold. He was working with the spade, turning over the frozen earth with steady, powerful strokes. The muscles in his shoulders and arms moved beneath his work shirt, and Emma felt her face heat at noticing such details. She grabbed a rake and began breaking up the clods he loosened, working in companionable silence. The morning wore on. The sun climbed higher, providing a little warmth, though the wind still carried winter's bite. Preston worked tirelessly, his breath misting in the air, and Emma found herself stealing glances at him. There was something deeply comforting about his presence, a steadiness that made her feel less alone than she had in months. What brought you to Nevada? She asked during a brief rest, needing to break the silence that was becoming too comfortable. Preston leaned on his shovel and wiped his brow with his sleeve. Wanderlust, mostly. I've been drifting since the war, since after the war. I was too young to fight, but old enough to see what it did to folks. Didn't see much point in staying in Missouri after my parents passed from fever. So, I learned to work cattle, and I've been moving west ever since. Nevada seemed as good a place as any to settle for a while. The war seems like a lifetime ago, Emma said softly. I was just a girl then. My mother used to read the newspaper reports, and she'd cry over all those boys dying so far from home. Your mother passed 2 years ago. Influenza took her in the space of a week. It's been just Papa and me since then. Emma's throat tightened. Or it was until he got sick. Now it's mostly just me. Preston's expression softened with understanding and sympathy. That's a heavy load for anyone to carry. But you're stronger than you know, Miss Harper. I can see it in you. Emma did not feel strong. She felt tired and scared and desperately uncertain. But Preston's words, spoken with such conviction, made something warm unfurl in her chest. She ducked her head and went back to raking, not trusting herself to respond. They worked until past noon when Emma insisted on making dinner. She had little to offer, just some salt pork, beans, and yesterday's cornbread, but Preston accepted the simple meal with genuine thanks and ate with the appetite of a man who had done a hard morning's work. They sat at the rough wooden table in the Harper's small kitchen while Robert dozed in the other room, and Emma found herself watching the way Preston's hands moved as he ate, scarred and calloused from years of rope and leather, but somehow gentle. "What about you?" Preston asked, mopping up the last of his beans with the cornbread. "Have you always lived in Yarrington?" "No, we came out here 6 years ago when Papa heard about the silver strikes. He thought he'd make our fortune, but the good claims were already taken by the time we arrived. He worked other men's claims for wages, and Mama and I took in washing and sewing. It was enough, just barely. We got this house and the bit of land around it, and Mama planted the garden. She had such a gift for growing things. Everything she touched seemed to flourish." Emma's voice caught. "I've tried to keep it going the way she would have wanted, but I don't have her touch. This winter has been so hard, and then the freeze. You've got more of her gift than you think," Preston interrupted gently. "That garden plot is well tended. The soil is rich and properly drained. You've done everything right. Sometimes nature just doesn't cooperate, but that's not your failing. It's just the way of things. It feels like failing when you can't feed your family. I understand that, but you're not alone anymore. I meant what I said this morning. I'm going to help you get this garden growing, and come harvest, you'll have more vegetables than you'll know what to do with." Emma wanted to believe him, but hope felt dangerous. "You must have responsibilities at the Miller Ranch. You can't spend all your time helping me." "I'm foreman, which means I set my own schedule pretty much. The ranch is well established and the crew knows their jobs. I can spare a few hours here and there, especially in the early mornings and evenings. Besides, Mr. Miller is a decent man. When I tell him I'm helping a neighbor in need, he'll understand. He might even be willing to contribute some seeds or seedlings from his own stores." "I couldn't accept charity," Emma protested, pride flaring. "It's not charity. It's neighbors helping neighbors. That's how people survive out here. You think folks make it alone in this territory? They don't. They help each other and they accept help when it's offered, and that's what keeps communities strong." Preston's gaze held hers, steady and warm. "Let me do this, Miss Harper, please." The please undid her resistance. Emma nodded, feeling her eyes prickle with tears again. "Thank you. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "No repayment necessary. Your friendship is payment enough, friendship." The words settled around them, and Emma realized with a start that she wanted to know this man better, wanted to hear more about his life and his travels, wanted to see that gentle smile directed at her again. It had been so long since she had thought about anything beyond survival. But suddenly, sitting across from Preston James in her shabby kitchen, she felt something stir that had been dormant for years. After the meal, Preston insisted on splitting more firewood before he left, adding to the modest pile beside the house. As he worked, Emma watched from the doorway, her arms wrapped around herself against the cold. The rhythmic thunk of the axe was soothing, and she let herself imagine, just for a moment, what it might be like to have someone to share the burden with permanently. The thought was dangerous, and she pushed it away. When Preston finally mounted his horse to leave, The sun was already lowering toward the mountains in the west. He looked down at Emma from the saddle, his face shadowed beneath his hat brim. "I'll be back tomorrow morning early. We'll get the rest of that plot turned and start on amendments. In a few days, we can begin replanting. You'll see, Miss Harper, by the time June comes around, you'll have forgotten all about this frozen garden." "I think I'll remember," Emma said quietly, "but perhaps not in the way you think." Something flickered in Preston's expression, an awareness that made Emma's breath catch. Then he touched the brim of his hat in farewell and rode off down the rutted path that led toward the main road. Emma watched until he disappeared from view, then turned back to the house with a lighter heart than she had carried in months. True to his word, Preston returned the next morning just after dawn, and the morning after that, and the one after that. Each day, he arrived with his tools and his steady, calming presence, and together they worked on resurrecting the garden. Emma found herself looking forward to his arrivals with an anticipation that had nothing to do with the garden and everything to do with the warmth that suffused her chest whenever he smiled at her. They talked while they worked, sharing stories of their childhoods and their losses. Preston spoke of his parents' farm in Missouri, of learning to ride before he could properly walk, of the restlessness that had driven him west after he found himself alone in the world. Emma told him about her mother's laugh, about her father's stories of the California gold rush in his youth, about her own quiet dreams of maybe teaching school someday if circumstances ever allowed. "You'd make a fine teacher," Preston said one morning as they carefully planted potato sets in freshly turned earth. "You've got patience and kindness. Those are the most important qualities." "I never had much formal schooling myself," Emma admitted. "Mama taught me to read and cipher, and we had some books. But I always loved learning, and I thought maybe I could help other children love it too." "There's always time for dreams, Emma. Maybe not in the way we first imagined them, but they have a way of coming around if we don't give up." He had started calling her Emma instead of Miss Harper sometime during the second week, and she had started thinking of him as Preston rather than Mr. James. The familiarity felt natural, as if they had known each other much longer than the few weeks they had actually been acquainted. Her father, in his lucid moments, seemed to approve of the cowboy who came to help his daughter, though he worried aloud that Emma might be developing feelings that could lead to heartbreak. "He's a drifter, Emma girl," Robert said one evening after Preston had left. "Cowboys like him don't settle. They get restless and move on. I don't want to see you hurt." "I know what he is, Papa. I'm not foolish enough to build castles in the air. He's been kind to us, and I'm grateful. That's all." But even as she spoke the words, Emma knew they were not entirely true. She was developing feelings for Preston James, feelings that went far beyond gratitude. She thought about him when he was gone. She found herself taking extra care with her appearance on the mornings when she knew he would come. And when their hands accidentally touched while working, she felt sparks that had nothing to do with static from the dry air. Preston, for his part, seemed increasingly reluctant to leave each evening. He lingered over the simple meals Emma prepared. He found additional chores that needed doing around the property. And sometimes he would sit on the porch steps in the gathering dusk and talk with Emma about nothing in particular, just sharing the quiet peace of the evening. His eyes followed her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken, and more than once she caught him looking at her with an expression that seemed to hold questions he was not yet ready to ask. As March gave way to April, the weather finally began to warm in earnest. The garden plot transformed under their combined efforts. Fresh green shoots emerged from the soil, reaching toward the strengthening sun. The potato plants unfurled their leaves, the bean seeds sprouted, and the seedlings Preston had procured from the Miller Ranch took root and began to thrive. Emma felt her spirits lift along with the temperature, and the constant knot of anxiety in her chest loosened a fraction. Her father's condition remained precarious but stable. He had good days and bad days, and Emma learned to treasure the good ones and endure the bad. Preston often sat with Robert in the evenings, talking about mining and ranching and the changing territory, giving Emma a brief respite from the constant vigilance required to care for an invalid. Robert seemed to genuinely enjoy Preston's company, and Emma noticed that her father breathed a little easier on the days when the cowboy visited. One particularly warm evening in mid-April, Preston stayed later than usual. They sat on the porch together, watching the sun paint the distant mountains in shades of rose and gold. Robert was sleeping inside, his breathing more labored than usual, and Emma felt the familiar clutch of fear at her heart. "He's getting worse, isn't he?" Preston asked quietly. Emma nodded, not trusting her voice. "I'm sorry. I wish there was something I could do." "You've already done so much, more than we had any right to expect. The garden is thriving, and that means we'll have food through the summer and fall. You've given us that security." "It doesn't feel like enough." Emma turned to look at him, finding his gaze already on her. In the fading light, his features were soft and his eyes were full of an emotion that made her breath catch. "It's more than enough, Preston. You've been a blessing." "Emma," he said, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. "I need to tell you something, and I hope I'm not speaking out of turn. These past weeks, working beside you, getting to know you, it's been the best time I've had in years. Maybe ever. I came to Yerington planning to stay for a season, maybe two, before drifting on like I always do. But now I don't want to drift anymore. I want to stay. And the reason I want to stay is you." Emma's heart hammered in her chest. "Preston, let me finish, please. I know I don't have much to offer. I make decent wages as a foreman, but I'm not a wealthy man. I live in the bunkhouse at the Miller Ranch, and all my possessions fit in a saddle bag. But I'm honest, and I'm hardworking, and I give you my word that I'd spend every day trying to make you happy if you'd let me. Emma Harper, I'm falling in love with you. I think I started falling that first morning when I saw you crying over your frozen garden, and I haven't stopped since." Tears spilled down Emma's cheeks, but these were not tears of despair. These were tears of joy and relief, and a happiness so acute it was almost painful. "I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered. "I tried not to. I told myself you'd leave eventually, that I was foolish to hope, but I couldn't help it." Preston reached for her hand, his rough palm warm against hers. "Then can I court you properly? Can I come around not just to help with the garden, but because I want to spend time with you? Because I want to build something real with you?" "Yes," Emma breathed. "Yes, please." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently, his eyes never leaving hers. The gesture was both chaste and intimate, and Emma felt warmth flood through her entire body. Everything about this moment felt right in a way that nothing had felt right in far too long. They sat together on the porch until full dark, hands entwined, making quiet plans and sharing soft words. When Preston finally rode away that night, Emma floated back into the house feeling as if her feet did not quite touch the ground. She checked on her father and found him awake, watching her with knowing eyes. "He asked to court me," she told him, unable to keep the joy from her voice. Robert smiled, though the expression was strained. "I know, I heard. He's a good man, Emma, better than most. I'm glad you'll have someone when I'm gone." "Papa, don't talk like that." "Hush now, we both know the truth. I'm glad, truly. I was so worried about leaving you alone, but now you'll have Preston. Promise me you'll let yourself be happy with him. Promise me you won't spend your life mourning." "Papa, promise me, Emma girl." "I promise," she whispered, tears streaming down her face, Robert closed his eyes, seeming satisfied. "Good, that's good. Now tell me about the garden. Are the tomatoes sprouting yet?" Emma wiped her eyes and began to describe the garden's progress, painting a picture of the green and growing things that would soon provide abundance. Her father listened with a peaceful expression, and eventually his breathing evened out into sleep. Emma sat beside his bed long into the night, holding his thin hand and praying for more time, even as she knew in her heart that time was running out. Preston came earlier than usual the next morning, and Emma met him in the yard with red-rimmed eyes and exhaustion dragging at her limbs. He took one look at her face and pulled her into his arms without a word, holding her against his chest while she finally let herself fall apart. She sobbed into his shirt, releasing the fear and grief and exhaustion she had been holding in for so long, and he simply held her, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring wordless comfort. "He's dying," she finally managed. "It could be days or weeks, but he's dying and there's nothing I can do." "You're doing everything you can. You're being there for him and you're making sure he's comfortable and loved. That's what matters. It doesn't feel like enough. I know, but it is. Trust me, it is." They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, and Emma drew strength from Preston's solid presence. Eventually, she pulled back and scrubbed at her face, embarrassed by her breakdown. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have fallen apart on you like that. Don't you dare apologize. That's what I'm here for, to help carry the burden when it gets too heavy." Preston cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away the remaining tears. "You don't have to be strong all the time, Emma. Not with me." She covered his hands with hers, overwhelmed by the depth of feeling in his eyes. "How did I get so lucky to have you walk into my life? I think I'm the lucky one." He leaned down and kissed her forehead, a gesture of tenderness that made Emma's heart swell. Then he took her hand and led her to the garden, where the morning sun was just beginning to warm the earth, and the plants were pearled with dew. Together, they worked among the growing things, and the familiar rhythm of the labor soothed Emma's ragged emotions. May arrived with clear skies and warming temperatures. The garden flourished, just as Preston had promised. The potato plants bloomed with delicate flowers, the bean vines climbed their supports, and the squash plants spread their broad leaves across the carefully mounded hills. Emma spent her days divided between tending her father and working the garden, and Preston was there as often as his ranch duties allowed, which was remarkably often given how much freedom his position afforded him. Robert Harper passed away peacefully on a warm May evening, with Emma holding one hand and Preston holding the other. His last words were to tell Emma that he loved her, and that he was proud of the woman she had become. Then he simply closed his eyes and was gone, his long struggle with consumption finally over. The grief was crushing, but Preston was there to help carry it. He made the funeral arrangements, paid for the simple coffin with his own wages over Emma's protests, and stood beside her at the graveside service, while the preacher spoke words that barely registered through her fog of loss. The small community of Yerington turned out to pay their respects to Robert Harper, and Emma was touched by the number of people who offered condolences and shared stories of her father's kindness over the years. In the days that followed, Emma moved through her routines like a ghost, tending the garden mechanically and trying to adjust to the emptiness of the house. Preston was there every day, a steady presence that kept her grounded. He did not try to cheer her or tell her that everything would be all right. He simply stayed close, offering quiet comfort and practical help, and gradually, the worst of the grief began to ease into something more bearable. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Preston broached a subject that had clearly been on his mind. "Emma, I know this might not be the right time, but I need to ask. What are your plans? Are you going to stay in this house? Emma had been avoiding thinking about the future, but she could not avoid it forever. I don't know. The house is mine now and the land, but I don't know if I can afford to keep them. There are taxes, and I'll need to buy more supplies for winter, and without Papa's income, even as little as he was earning, I don't know how I'll manage. You could sell the property, Preston suggested gently. Take the money and start fresh somewhere else. The thought of leaving the house where her mother had lived and died, where her father had breathed his last, was almost unbearable. But so was the thought of struggling alone to maintain a property she could not afford. Or, Preston continued, his voice careful, you could stay and I could help you, not as a neighbor or a friend, but as something more. Emma turned to look at him, her heart suddenly racing. Preston took her hand, his expression serious. I love you, Emma. I've loved you since that first morning, and I'll love you for the rest of my life. I know it's only been a few months, and I know you're grieving, and maybe this is too soon. But I don't want to waste time pretending I feel differently than I do. Marry me. Let me move into this house and help you work this land. Let me take care of you the way you deserve to be taken care of. Let me love you the way I've wanted to from the beginning. Emma's eyes filled with tears, but for once they were tears of pure joy. Yes, she said, her voice breaking. Yes, I'll marry you. I love you, Preston. You brought me back to life when I thought I had nothing left to live for. Preston pulled her into his arms and kissed her with a passion that had been restrained for weeks, and Emma kissed him back with all the love and hope and gratitude that filled her heart. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Preston rested his forehead against hers and smiled. You've made me the happiest man in Nevada territory. When? Emma asked. When should we marry? As soon as you're ready. Tomorrow if you want, or next month. Whenever feels right to you. Emma thought about it. Propriety suggested she should wait, that she should observe a proper mourning period. But her father's last words had been to promise she would let herself be happy, and waiting felt like wasting precious time. 2 weeks, she decided. That will give us time to arrange things properly, but not so long that I lose my nerve. Preston laughed, the sound full of joy. You're not going to lose your nerve, but 2 weeks sounds perfect. They were married on a brilliant Saturday in late May, in the small church in Yerington with most of the town in attendance. Emma wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her taller frame, and carried a bouquet of wildflowers Preston had gathered from the rangeland. Preston wore his best shirt and trousers, his hair freshly cut, and his face was radiant as Emma walked down the aisle toward him. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. Emma's hands shook as she repeated her vows, but Preston's hands were steady as he slipped the simple gold band onto her finger. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Preston kissed her with such tenderness that Emma forgot everyone else in the church, lost in the moment, and in the man who had promised her a spring she would never forget. And indeed, she never forgot it. That spring of 1883 became the turning point of her life, the moment when everything changed from darkness to light, from despair to hope, from loneliness to love. The wedding celebration was held in the yard of their home, with tables set up among the flourishing garden beds. The Miller ranch crew came in force, bringing food and drink and music. Emma met Preston's employer, Frederick Miller, who turned out to be a jovial man in his 60s who clapped Preston on the back and told Emma that she had married the finest foreman in the territory. You take good care of him, Mrs. James, Miller said with a wink. He's valuable to me, and I don't want to lose him to some other outfit. I'll do my best, Emma promised, smiling. As the sun set and the celebration wound down, Preston and Emma finally found themselves alone. They stood in the garden, surrounded by the plants they had nurtured together, and Emma marveled at how much had changed since that frozen March morning when she had knelt in the dead earth and wept. "You kept your promise," she told Preston, touching his face. "You gave me a spring I'll never forget." "This is just the beginning," Preston replied, pulling her close. "I plan to give you a summer and fall and winter you'll never forget too. And then we'll do it all over again, year after year, for as long as we both shall live." He kissed her deeply, and Emma melted into his embrace, feeling safe and loved and cherished. Around them, the garden rustled in the evening breeze, and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Life stretched ahead of them, full of unknown possibilities and certain challenges, but Emma no longer faced the future with fear. She had Preston beside her, and together they could weather any storm. Their first year of marriage was everything Emma could have hoped for and more. Preston settled into life on their small homestead with an ease that suggested he had been born for it. He continued his work as foreman at the Miller Ranch, but his heart was clearly with Emma and the life they were building together. They worked the garden and tended the chickens Preston bought with his first month's wages, and they began making plans to expand their operation. The garden yielded abundantly, just as Preston had predicted. By late summer, Emma was canning vegetables and putting up preserves, her cellar shelves filling with jars that represented security through the coming winter. They sold the surplus at the weekly market in Yerington, and the income, combined with Preston's wages, gave them a financial stability Emma had not known in years. But more than the material improvements, it was the emotional richness of her life that amazed Emma. She had not realized how lonely she had been until she was no longer alone. Having Preston to talk to in the evenings, to laugh with over simple jokes, to share the daily triumphs and frustrations, it filled a void she had grown so accustomed to that she had stopped noticing it was there. Preston was an attentive husband, thoughtful and affectionate. He brought her wildflowers for no reason, helped with the household chores without being asked, and held her close at night while they talked about their dreams for the future. Emma felt herself blooming under his care like one of the plants in her garden, unfolding petals she had not known she possessed. By the time winter came around again, Emma was pregnant. The discovery filled her with a complex mixture of joy and terror. She had always wanted children, but the memory of her mother's difficult pregnancies and her own uncertain future had made it seem like an impossible dream. Now that dream was becoming reality, and she could not quite believe it. Preston was elated when she told him. He picked her up and spun her around, then immediately set her down with an anxious expression and asked if spinning her was bad for the baby. Emma laughed until tears ran down her face, and Preston held her close, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "We're going to have a family," he said, wonder in his voice. "A real family." "We already are a family," Emma reminded him. "But yes, now we'll be a bigger one." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter months. Preston fussed over Emma, insisting she rest more and work less, and she tolerated his anxious hovering with affectionate amusement. They spent the long winter evenings planning and preparing, turning the small storage room off the main bedroom into a nursery. Preston built a cradle with his own hands, working on it secretly in the Miller Ranch workshop and bringing it home as a surprise. When Emma saw it, beautifully crafted and polished to a soft sheen, she cried with happiness. Their son was born on a warm day in June of 1884, delivered by the local midwife in the bedroom of their little house. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Emma was certain she would not survive. But Preston stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and whispering encouragement. And when the baby finally arrived with a lusty cry, Emma forgot all the pain in the overwhelming rush of love for the tiny, red-faced creature placed in her arms. "He's perfect," Preston said, his voice choked with emotion as he touched the baby's tiny hand. "Absolutely perfect. What should we name him?" They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy, unable to agree on anything. But now, looking at her son's face, Emma knew exactly what he should be called. "Robert," she said, "after my father, Robert James." Preston nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Robert James, I like that. Your father would have been proud to meet him." "I think he knows," Emma said softly. "Somehow, I think he knows." The early days of parenthood were exhausting and overwhelming, but also filled with a joy Emma had not known existed. Little Robert was a good baby, healthy and strong, with his father's hazel eyes and his mother's auburn hair. Preston proved to be a devoted father, getting up in the night to walk the floor with a fussy baby so Emma could rest, changing diapers without complaint, and staring at his son with an expression of such pure love that it made Emma's heart ache. Life settled into a new rhythm. The garden continued to thrive, providing food and income. Preston's position at the Miller Ranch became increasingly secure, and he received a raise in wages that allowed them to start saving money for future improvements. They added a room onto the house, expanding their living space, and purchased a milk cow and several pigs. Slowly but surely, they were building something substantial. As Robert grew from infant to toddler, Emma marveled at how much her life had changed. 3 years ago, she had been alone and desperate, kneeling in frozen earth and crying over her failures. Now she had a husband she loved deeply, a son who filled her days with laughter, a home that was truly hers, and a security she had once thought impossible. One spring morning in 1886, as Emma worked in the garden with Robert playing in the dirt nearby and Preston repairing the fence line, she paused to look around at everything they had created. The garden was lush and green, the house stood solid and well-maintained, and the sound of her son's happy babbling mixed with the chickens clucking and Preston whistling while he worked. It was a simple life, but it was a good life, and it was theirs. Preston caught her looking and walked over, wiping sweat from his brow. "What are you thinking about? Just how far we've come. Sometimes I can hardly believe this is real." Preston pulled her into his arms, heedless of the dirt on both of them. "It's real, and it's going to get even better. I've been talking with Mr. Miller, and he's thinking about selling off some of his land. I thought we might try to buy some acreage adjacent to ours, expand our operation, maybe run some cattle of our own." Emma's eyes widened. "Could we afford that?" "With the money we've saved and a loan from the bank, I think we could manage. It would be a risk, but I think it's a good one." "What do you think?" Emma thought about it, then nodded slowly. "I think we should do it. We didn't get where we are by playing it safe." Preston grinned and kissed her soundly. "That's my brave girl. We'll go talk to the bank next week." True to their plan, they purchased 20 acres of rangeland adjacent to their property and started a small cattle operation. It was hard work, and there were times when Emma wondered if they had bitten off more than they could chew. But Preston was a skilled cattleman, and with help from some of the Miller Ranch hands, they built up a modest herd. The additional income allowed them to hire occasional help for the garden, which had expanded to include fruit trees and berry bushes. By 1888, Emma was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy felt easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect or perhaps because her life was so much more stable. Their daughter was born in the cool of October, a tiny, delicate girl with Emma's gray-green eyes and Preston's easy smile. "Anna," Emma said, looking at her daughter's face. "Anna Marie James." "It's beautiful," Preston agreed, sitting on the bed beside his wife with 4-year-old Robert crowded in close to see his new sister. "She's beautiful. You're beautiful. I'm the luckiest man alive." Emma laughed, exhausted but happy. "I think we're both pretty lucky." The years rolled by, full and rich. Robert grew into a sturdy, confident boy who loved working alongside his father with the cattle. Anna was a bright, curious child who followed her mother around the garden, learning the names of plants and how to coax them into bloom. A third child, a son they named Thomas, arrived in 1891, completing their family. Preston and Emma worked side by side, building their ranch into a prosperous operation. They were not wealthy by any stretch of the imagination, but they were comfortable and, more importantly, they were happy. The love between them had not faded with time or the trials of daily life. If anything, it had deepened, becoming a fundamental part of who they were. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Preston surprised Emma by taking her to the garden where they had first worked together. It had expanded far beyond that original frozen plot, now encompassing nearly an acre of vegetables, herbs, flowers, and fruit trees. But Preston led her to a specific spot, and Emma realized with a start that it was the exact place where she had been kneeling that cold March morning, crying over her losses. "You remember?" Preston asked, his arm around her waist. "How could I forget?" "It was the worst morning of my life until it became the best." "I saw you from the road," Preston said softly, "and something just pulled me toward you. I couldn't ride past. I had to stop, had to see if I could help." "I've always believed in providence, in the idea that we're guided to where we need to be, and that morning I was guided to you." Emma turned in his arms, blinking back tears. "You saved me. You know that, don't you? I was drowning and you threw me a lifeline." "You saved me too," Preston replied. "I was drifting, going nowhere with no purpose beyond the next job in the next town. You gave me a reason to stop, to put down roots, to build something that matters. You gave me a home, Emma. You gave me a life." They kissed, long and deep, and when they broke apart, they were both smiling. Around them, the garden rustled with life, and from the house came the sound of their children's laughter. The spring sun warmed the earth, and the air smelled of growing things and new beginnings. "I love you," Emma said, "more than I can ever express." "I love you too. And I'm grateful every single day that I stopped to help a woman crying over a frozen garden." Emma laughed through her tears. "Best decision you ever made, Cowboy." "Best decision we both made," Preston corrected. "You could have sent me away, but you let me in. You took a chance on a drifter with nothing but good intentions and a promise. That took courage." "Or desperation," Emma said wryly. "Courage," Preston insisted. "And I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret it." As the sun climbed higher in the sky and the garden stretched green and vital around them, Emma knew with absolute certainty that she never would. The frozen garden of March 1883 had bloomed into a life more beautiful than she could have imagined, and the cowboy who had promised her an unforgettable spring had given her an unforgettable lifetime. The years continued to unfold with the steady rhythm of seasons. Robert grew into a tall young man who took over more and more of the ranch work, showing the same steady capability his father possessed. Anna proved to have her mother's gift for growing things, and by the time she was 12, she was managing much of the garden herself, experimenting with new varieties and techniques. Thomas, the baby, was a dreamer who loved books and learning, and Emma took special joy in teaching him, fulfilling in a small way that old dream of being a teacher. Preston's hair began to show silver at the temples, and Emma found laugh lines forming around her eyes, but neither of them minded the passage of time. They had built something lasting, something that would endure beyond them in the lives of their children. The ranch prospered. Their cattle herd grew to a respectable size, and they were able to purchase additional land, expanding their holdings. They were now established members of the Yerington community, respected and valued. But it was not the material success that mattered most to Emma. It was the small moments, Preston's hand finding hers as they sat on the porch in the evenings, the sound of her children's voices raised in play, the satisfaction of walking through her garden and seeing the abundance they had created together. It was the knowledge that she was loved and valued, that she had a partner who would stand beside her through whatever challenges life might bring. When Robert announced at 18 that he wanted to attend the agricultural college in Reno to learn modern ranching techniques, Emma and Preston scraped together the tuition with pride. When Anna, at 16, fell in love with the son of a neighboring rancher, they gave their blessing to the match and planned a wedding. When Thomas expressed a desire to become a teacher, they encouraged him wholeheartedly. They had worked hard to give their children opportunities they themselves had never had, and they took deep satisfaction in seeing those children flourish. The turn of the century found Preston and Emma in their early 40s, still healthy and active, surrounded by a growing family that now included grandchildren. On New Year's Day of 1900, they gathered everyone together for a family portrait. Emma looked at the faces surrounding her husband, her children, her grandchildren, even Mr. Miller, who had become like family over the years, and felt such overwhelming gratitude that it nearly took her breath away. That night, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Preston and Emma sat alone by the fire. The house was quiet except for the crackling of the logs, and Emma leaned against Preston's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him. "You ever think about how it all started?" she asked. "That morning when you found me in the garden." "I think about it often," Preston admitted. "I think about the scared, brave woman I met that day, and I'm amazed at everything she's accomplished, everything we've accomplished together." "I was so lost then," Emma said softly. "I thought my life was over. I thought I had nothing left. And now I have everything. More than everything. I have you and our children and a life I'm proud of. You did keep your promise, you know. You gave me a spring I'd never forget, but you gave me so much more than that." Preston turned to kiss her temple. "We gave each other something to live for. That's the real gift. Not the garden or the ranch or any of the material things, but the partnership, the love, the commitment to building something together." Emma nodded, feeling tears prick her eyes. "I'm grateful every day. Even when things were hard, even in the difficult times, I never once regretted saying yes to you." "The difficult times made the good times sweeter," Preston said. "And we faced all of it together. That's what matters." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn low, secure in the knowledge that they would face whatever the future held side by side, just as they had faced everything else. The frozen garden was a distant memory now, but the spring that had followed had never truly ended. It had simply transformed into a lifetime of growth and renewal, of love and partnership, of building something meaningful from the ashes of despair. As Emma drifted off to sleep that night, nestled against Preston in their bed, she thought about that crying woman in the frozen garden, and she wished she could reach back through time to tell her not to lose hope. To tell her that help was coming, that love was coming, that everything would be all right. But of course, she could not reach back. She could only move forward, grateful beyond measure for the cowboy who had stopped to help a stranger and had stayed to build a life. The spring of 1901 found Emma back in the garden, now expanded and mature with fruit trees in full bloom and perennial beds that returned more glorious each year. She was 53 years old now, her hair streaked with silver and her hands marked with the evidence of decades of hard work. But she was happy, deeply and truly happy, in a way she had never imagined possible. Preston came to find her there, moving a bit more slowly than he once had but still strong and capable. He stood beside her, looking at the garden they had built together, and Emma leaned into him, breathing in his familiar scent. "It's beautiful," she said. "Every year I think it can't get more beautiful, and every year I'm proven wrong." "Gardens are like that," Preston said. "And marriages too, I think. They just keep growing and deepening if you tend them properly." Emma smiled. "We've tended ours well. We have indeed." They walked through the garden together, hand in hand, examining the new growth and planning the season ahead. And as they walked, Emma reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From despair to hope, from loneliness to love, from a frozen garden to a blooming paradise. It had not always been easy, but it had always been worth it. That night, as they lay in bed together, Preston pulled Emma close and whispered in her ear, "Thank you for letting me love you all these years. Thank you for building this life with me." Emma turned to face him, touching his weathered face with gentle fingers. "Thank you for keeping your promise. Thank you for that spring and every season since. Thank you for being exactly who you are." They kissed with the deep familiarity of decades together, and Emma felt the same spark she had felt on that first evening when Preston had declared his love on the porch. Some things never changed, and some kinds of magic never faded. Their love was one of those things, constant and enduring, the foundation on which everything else was built. Years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows as life always did. They lost Mr. Miller to old age, and Preston took over the management of what had once been the Miller Ranch, now owned by the Miller heirs who trusted Preston implicitly. Robert married and took over the daily operation of the family ranch, allowing Preston and Emma to slow down a bit and enjoy their grandchildren. Anna had 4 children of her own and lived nearby, visiting often with her brood. Thomas became a teacher as he had dreamed, working at the school in Yerington and bringing Emma reports of his students that made her heart warm. There were hard times too. They lost a year's calf crop to disease and had to rebuild their herd. A drought tested their resources and their spirits. They nursed each other through illnesses and injuries, and felt the aches of aging bodies that no longer bounced back as quickly as they once had. But through it all, they had each other, and that made every burden lighter and every joy sweeter. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children arranged a celebration at the church in Yerington. The whole community turned out, filling the building with laughter and music and fellowship. Emma wore a new dress that Anna had sewn for her, and Preston wore a suit that made him tug at his collar uncomfortably, but his eyes shone as he looked at his wife. The pastor asked them to share the secret of their long and happy marriage, and Preston pulled Emma to her feet beside him. They stood together in front of the assembled crowd, and Preston spoke, his voice carrying easily through the room. "The secret is simple," he said. "We chose each other every day, not just on our wedding day, but every day since. When things were hard, when we were tired or frustrated or scared, we chose each other. We chose to stay, to work through problems instead of running from them, to love each other even when it was not easy. And we were blessed to build a life on a foundation of friendship and respect and genuine affection. Emma is not just my wife. She's my best friend, my partner, and the greatest blessing of my life." Emma could not speak for a moment, too moved by Preston's words. When she finally found her voice, it was thick with emotion. "Preston saw me at my lowest moment and chose to help me anyway. He promised me a spring I would never forget, and he spent 25 years keeping that promise. Every day with him has been a gift. Every challenge we faced together. Every joy we celebrated together. That's the secret if there is one. We built a life together, not two separate lives that happen to intersect. Together. Always together. The crowd erupted in applause, and their children hugged them, and Emma saw tears on more than one face in the audience. The celebration continued late into the night, with dancing and feasting and storytelling. Emma danced with Preston until her feet hurt, then sat and watched her children and grandchildren dance, her heart full to overflowing. As she watched Thomas swinging one of Anna's daughters around the dance floor, and Robert holding his youngest son while his wife rested, and Anna laughing with her husband about something, Emma felt a profound sense of completion. This was what life was meant to be. Not perfect, not without struggles or sorrows, but full of love and connection and meaning. She had created this, she and Preston together. From the ashes of loss and the frost of despair, they had built a family and a community and a legacy that would endure. Preston returned to her side with 2 cups of punch, his face flushed from dancing but his smile bright. He handed her a cup and sat beside her, and they watched their family together. "We did good," Preston said softly. "We did great," Emma corrected. They clinked their cups together in a toast, then drank, then simply sat in comfortable silence, surrounded by the noise and love of their family. And Emma thought back to that frozen garden, that moment of utter despair when she had believed she had nothing left to live for. If she could have seen forward to this moment, would she have believed it possible? Would that broken young woman kneeling in the frozen earth have been able to imagine this fullness, this richness, this abundance of love? She did not know. But she was grateful beyond measure that Preston had stopped that day, that he had made his promise and kept it, that he had chosen to love her and to stay. She was grateful for every day, every season, every year they had built together. The frozen garden had bloomed, just as he had promised. But more than that, her heart had bloomed and her life had bloomed, and she had become someone she never would have been without him. As the celebration wound down and they prepared to return home, Preston helped Emma into their wagon, and they rode through the spring night together under a canopy of stars. The air smelled of growing things and fresh earth, and Emma leaned against Preston's shoulder, feeling the steady presence that had anchored her life for a quarter century. "I love you," she said, simple and true. "I love you too," Preston replied, just as simple and just as true. And in that exchange, in those words repeated countless times over countless days, lay the entire story of their life together. A story that had started with tears over a frozen garden and had bloomed into something more beautiful than either of them could have imagined. A story of choosing love, of keeping promises, of building something meaningful together. A story that was, in the end, the very best kind of story, one of hope fulfilled and dreams realized and love that endured. The wagon rolled on through the night, carrying them home to the garden they had built together, and Emma smiled into the darkness, her heart full and her spirit at peace. The cowboy had kept his promise. He had given her a spring she would never forget. But more than that, he had given her a lifetime of springs, each one blooming more beautifully than the last, each one a testament to the power of love and the miracle of 2 lives joined into one.